The Florida Gators getting ready to add more talent to their 2026 recruiting class. Let's talk about who might be next.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you're in the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And today we're going to talk about a few players that are more than a few, but we're going to talk about players that the Florida Gators are recruiting, still have not committed anywhere. Since the last time we spoke about them, we are talking about two players that are committed elsewhere, and we will cover both of them, of course, equally. And obviously flip targets for the Florida Gators. But the first one we're going to talk about is Trenton Henderson, someone that we've spoken about quite a bit here, especially lately, but edge defender here that the Florida Gators are recruiting. I believe he should be at or near the top of the edge board for this class. And announced yesterday that it's between Florida, Texas, and LSU. And which, by the way, was just kind of interesting to begin with because he went on an LSU visit first and he said, hey, LSU was there. Like LSU was number one on his rankings. And then he went on the Florida OV. And Florida took that spot as number one on the list. And then he was supposed to take a visit to USC and canceled that to go to Texas, who, look, I know that going into it, a lot of people felt that Texas wasn't a real threat. My stance on that is that if a kid is taking an official visit to Texas, they're a threat. Okay. That's how I look at it, at least, that if you're getting an official visit to Texas and Texas has that money, they've got a great atmosphere. They're going to be a really good team again this year. I think they're a threat. I don't care how comfortable anyone feels. They're a threat if they're visiting Texas. I will say though, by the way, commitment date is set for July 2nd. I personally still think that Florida is in the lead here. They really picked up momentum in the past month or so. So I really think that Florida is still in the lead here. They've picked up momentum in the past month or so. After the last minute visit or last week visit with Texas, there's still optimism from people I've spoken to, which is not the case with everybody. I was telling people that after the Texas visit with Rodney Cleveland that I was like, well, people I've spoken to have said they feel really good about landing him. And of course they did end up landing Rodney Cleveland. I have not felt that same sentiment with Trenton Henderson, that they did not still, or that they didn't feel that he would wind up with Texas. That didn't feel like that was going to be what happens. And so with this commitment date set for July 2nd next week, Florida still feels like they're in the driver's seat. I personally still think that it's Florida, LSU, and Texas. I think Texas is third here. So unless LSU, drops a bag or gets another unofficial visit there, I think it's kind of done for that. And again, I think Texas is in third here. So feel pretty good for Florida with Trenton Henderson at this point in time. Obviously, it's recruiting. Things can change in a phone call, really. And so we'll see what happens there. But right now, I still think Trenton Henderson feels like a Florida Gator. Another edge defender, Kreul, IMG edge that Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, and Ole Miss are all in his Final Four right now. I mean, the plan right now is for him to make his commitment in the fall or the winter when it's actually signing day. We'll see when that happens. if that timeline changes at all. I know that there have been quite a few people earlier in the process that thought he'd be a guy to commit maybe in this stretch, this June, early July stretch that we've seen, but it does seem like he's still intent on holding out until the fall or the winter. He's supposed to take, before we even do that, I think right now Oklahoma's in the lead. People that I have spoken to have told me that they think Oklahoma's in the lead. And so I still think Oklahoma's in the lead. I think that all four of these schools are genuine threats. Florida, the in-state school. Texas is Texas. Ole Miss is Ole Miss. They've been able to get guys, especially on the defensive line, to go there. Oklahoma, great defensive line. Probably going to stay great, so it makes sense to continue recruiting there. But I think right now Oklahoma's in the lead, and there's still plenty of time to change that because, again, it does feel like he's actually going to wait until fall or winter. His plan is to take fall visits to all four of those schools. They'd be unofficials, but I would imagine that he's going to go to probably one of the bigger games for all of these schools. And so that's one of the reasons that I really think it's still open. Is that, let's say Oklahoma is leading right now. First off, there's 5 months and a couple weeks until signing day. But also, if you go to a game that has just an insane atmosphere, like if you go to Texas at Florida, which isn't the game that I would take him to if I were Florida, but if you go to Texas at Florida, that atmosphere is going to be sick. It is. Like, no other way to put it. That atmosphere is going to be awesome with Texas at Florida. And so I do think that teams, and of course it's just going to be a matter of how schedules work out. But I do think that that game day visit could change a lot for any recruit. I think that it really matters, and it can really change a lot there when you go to campus and you see just an awesome atmosphere. And I think that for a place like Texas and Florida, who have, the two best atmospheres of the four schools there, I think that, man, it's tough to go to those games and then be like, oh, I don't want to be a part of that. That's a tough selling point. DQ Forkpaw, linebacker in Florida, said that Florida and Florida State were in the lead, but that Michigan and Clemson are also in there as well, which is kind of wild. I think that one's just a really interesting bunch to have there. I feel like that's a pretty rare combination to say, hey, you know what schools I'm looking at? Florida and Florida State make a ton of sense. And then to go, yep, by the way, also Michigan and Clemson. So always an interesting one there. North Carolina, I know that he's been tweeting about North Carolina a couple times in I think he tweeted about them twice in the past 8 days or something like that. I don't know how in it they are, especially because if I'm not mistaken, Jamie Collins is their linebacker coach, which tremendous player, but he was known for playing out of structure and not being a big structure guy. And so I'm very interested to know how a guy that did that can coach. That just seems like a weird mix. But said it's Florida and Florida State in the lead. Michigan and Clemson are in there as well. Doesn't have a commitment date set. I know that there are camps that think, hey, he could pop soon. I know that there are camps that think, hey, even if he does pop soon, it's going to take a bit before we really feel comfortable. All that. I'll say this. He seems like a 50-50 kid right now. Or we'll say 40-40, 10-10, right? And so I would love to add to the class, but it does feel like so up in the air right now that I don't know who's leading, in which case I go, all right, well, then I don't have confidence in holding on to a commitment that early, just because, again, it's a long time to hold on to a commitment for a kid that doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like there's a clear favorite. And I think, with Trenton Henderson, there feels like there's a favorite. And with quite a few people, it feels like there's a favorite. Here, there's not. And that's always interesting to see if you can hold on to those. We are going to talk about the tight end room because there are 3 tight ends to talk about here that Florida is very much pursuing right now. We'll get to that with Locked On Gators. Summer sports are in full swing. And if you bet Oklahoma City Thunder to win the NBA Finals before the season, congratulations. Got a Got a good payout there. But now it's all about baseball, right? FanDuel, best way to make every game more exciting. We got a Dinger Tuesday. You bet on hits. It's just a blast. And if you're new to FanDuel, guess what? New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So you open the FanDuel app, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you go ahead and get started. And if that first bet wins, at least it's $5, then you can get $150 in bonus bets with FanDuel.com. Thanks for being Locked On Gators, your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free every single podcast and on YouTube. And we're going to talk about some tight end targets for the Florida Gators here in this 2026 recruiting class. We're going to start with Kaiden Prothro. He's, viewed, I think, publicly and privately by a lot of schools as the cream of the crop tight end target here, tight end recruit. The finalists are Georgia, Texas, and Florida. And I think it's in that order. I don't know that definitively, but I think it's in that order. And honestly, I've been very open about for quite some time now. Before he took his visit, all that stuff, before he took all his visits, everything, I've been saying that I expect it to be Georgia. This feels like a Georgia recruitment right now. It feels like a recruitment where Georgia's been in the lead, and it's not often where Georgia's in the lead for someone and they don't get them. And so I will say that I think it's Georgia right now. I've said that it's Georgia, or that I think it's going to be Georgia. And I have no reason to waver on that. He's committing on July 12th. Again, I expect him to be a Georgia Bulldog, but things can happen between then and now, right? I know that we can go, it's 2.5 weeks at this point, roughly 2.5 weeks. A lot can happen. A lot can stay the same as well. And again, a kid from Georgia or in Georgia that is being recruited by Georgia at tight end, where they've gotten multiple guys drafted in recent years, and the first 2 days of the draft, where they've got guys that they've got lined up as being kind of thought of as tight end U lately. They've got a lot going for them. Just going to be honest there. That's how I feel about Kaiden Prothro. I think it's Georgia right now. And even if it's not, I think it's Texas. I think Florida fell behind here, whether or not that's because they chose to sag off a little bit or it's just how it happened. But I think Florida's in third here. Heze Kent is another tight end target the Florida Gators are going for. And I will say this. I know that there are people who look at him because he's, 6'5", 6'6", 295 pounds. And that's obviously lineman size, right? And I know that there's people who feel that way about him and feel that he might long-term be an offensive lineman. Maybe. But I also think that when you watch the film, you look at someone that at that size moves really well. And so you kind of think, well, if we can get him to lose weight, then he's going to move really well. And so I fully get why teams are super interested in Heze Kent. I also, by the way, realize that there are teams that are going to look at him and say, hey, we can get him to lose some weight. And if he can, or if he doesn't work out at tight end, we can get him to add weight on and play offensive lineman, because we've seen him that big move well. And we know that he can add that weight and contribute and play at a high level. So I do think that there's a lot of layers to this recruitment with Heze Kent, of where you slot him initially, where you slot him long-term. But I do think that you should look at this and say, hey, let's let him start at tight end. And if he moves to lineman, he moves to lineman. That's how I feel with a lot of even offensive tackles. If you're a good enough offensive tackle, when we talk about the NFL draft, if you're a good enough offensive tackle, and I know there's going to be people that go, oh, well, a little short, 2 short arms, whatever it may be. If you're a good enough player, I would say, hey, put him at tackle, and I'll let him fail at tackle. And if he fails at tackle, I'll move him to guard. I think with Heze Kent, you could do that as well. You go, hey, put him at tight end, and if he fails at tight end, move him to tackle. Although I will say there's definitely people that I've spoken to that are thinking, hey, start him at offensive tackle, and if it doesn't work out, move him to tight end. Because offensive tackle is a premium position, tight end isn't. this one is just Heze Kent's recruitment is just one where, or not even his recruitment, just the evaluation process surrounding him has been all over the place. And I love seeing it. It's awesome. It's great conversation to have. But again, personally, like I think that they want to have him at tight end. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And then you can make a move from there. He has his top 5 set up: Florida, Miami, Texas, Georgia Tech, Florida State. I don't think it's in that order at all, except I do think Florida's in the lead. He's also committing on July 12th, similar to Kaiden Prothro. And my stance has always been and still is Florida. I think that when you see just the sheer amount of love that he has shown to Florida and that Florida has shown to him, I think it's really easy to look at that and say, I think both of them favor each other. And, you know, the whole love who loves you thing, I think they love each other. And so you could see that happen. Again, I think Florida's in the lead here. I think it's Miami and then Texas. And then Georgia Tech, Florida State. I don't know how they're shaping up, but I do think that that's kind of where we're looking at with favorites here. Although there are reports that Miami could be landing a 4-star tight end, in which case they would fall off there. It's all possible there. But we'll see what happens with that one. Whatever happens, happens. Carson Sneed is one of the 2 flip targets that we're talking about because he is currently committed to Tennessee at tight end. And he said that Florida isn't too far behind Tennessee or isn't too far off from Tennessee. Forget whatever verbiage he used. But that Florida and Tennessee, not too far apart. Will Griffin named Carson Sneed as someone that he goes, well, I still think Florida can flip him. He's a guy from their official visit weekend because they were there together. Where he said, hey, I still think Florida can flip him. He's a guy I think Florida can go get. Maybe, but I think that Carson Sneed saying that and then Will Griffin saying that kind of tells you, hey, this is legit. It's not just about, well, we're in it for everybody. It's not just blowing smoke there. And I think that this is a recruitment that I feel like we've talked about this for a while. I think it's one where it might go into the fall. And I do think that when we initially started talking about Carson Sneed here, we felt like Tennessee had a significant leg up and Florida has closed that gap. And so we'll see what happens with that one because I have always said this and I will continue to stick by this. My general stance on kids who are committed somewhere long-term, which he's been committed to Tennessee for almost a year, when kids are committed somewhere long-term and it feels like it might be a toss-up between them and another school, I find it really hard for the initial program, the initial commitment spot, to hold on to that. We've talked about it with a trillion kids here. Tavares Dice is the guy that I spoke about it a ton with because it felt like, yeah, committed to Auburn, but Florida is constantly knocking on the door here. And, you know, July 13th, if Kaiden Prothro and Heze Kent aren't in the Florida Gators class, I would think Carson Sneed becomes a priority target there. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. I think Heze Kent is very high on Florida's board. I think Kaiden Prothro is and probably should be. And just I realized that sounded weird. Should be, by the way. But we'll see. I think Florida might need to show Carson Sneed a little bit more during the season. They might need to show tight end usage, maybe improved a little bit in the passing game for Carson Sneed and convince him. But also, I'm not sure how high up he is on Florida's board. But again, if July 13th comes and you don't have a Prothro or a Kent in your class, I think that he really climbs up that board and he becomes more of a priority target at tight end. We are going to talk about a couple guys where I couldn't really just group them all into one spot. I'm sorry. When we get back with Locked On Gators. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And to wrap up today's show, we've got 3 more players to talk about, 2 corners and a receiver. First up is Brody Jennings, who is the other flip target. He is currently committed to Michigan at corner. And this is a recruitment that's been a little quiet, I'll say. You know, he's got personal things happening, and that's obviously understandable. We don't like to get into that too much here. Just we keep it light. But I was told that between the recruitment process, things have cooled off there recently. And I'll say over the past couple of weeks. I've been told things have been cooling off there. I think that with CJ Bronaugh committing last week, then Brody Jennings just might not be too much of a priority because, to my understanding, the way the timeline kind of unfolded here in the recruitment was that when Florida started gaining more traction with CJ Bronaugh, the communication and the love and the interest with Brody Jennings started slowing down, and then CJ Bronaugh committed, and so I feel like it's like, all right, well, Brody Jennings might not be too much of a priority, and I think that the reason he's not too much of a priority is because CJ Hester still is, and CJ Hester is the other player, or the next player that we're talking about here, also a corner. He's still a priority target for Florida. He's maybe the priority target for Florida here. I think that they're looking for at most 3 corners in this cycle. I think that they've got CJ Bronaugh, that's 1, and then at most 2 more. A top flight target, and like I've said, I think I said it on yesterday's show, I feel like toward the end of the cycle, we always see a guy at corner, or we'll say DB, where it doesn't feel like Florida's in there, and then the final months of the cycle, they're in there and they walk away with the kid. I think this year that's going to be their more developmental piece that they're looking at. CJ Hester is not that. CJ Hester is a priority piece for this Florida Gators 2026 recruiting class. He's a top flight target. And so I think that when CJ Bronaugh committed, it was kind of like, all right, well, now we take CJ Hester and we've got our top 2 corners, and then we don't need to prioritize the position until later on. And CJ Hester's committing on July 1st as well. So also, if Florida doesn't get CJ Hester, then you could see that communication with Brody Jennings pop off again. Florida still feels good about their placement with CJ Hester from what I've been told, which, again, could be why they've slowed down with Brody, right? You felt good about the way that you've recruited CJ Hester, which also, a lot of this, like, oh, we feel good with this, is the way that you've recruited a kid and the kid's response to that. Sometimes it's a kid outright saying how he feels, but even when a kid tells you exactly how they feel, take it with a grain of salt, because these things, 1, change so quick, and 2, kids have been known to just, when they're put on the spot, either commit on the spot or be like, you're my favorite. Like kids have done that plenty of times. It happens. It's not a thing that I hold against a kid, and I don't think anybody should. Putting someone who is, I mean, these kids are so rarely well equipped to handle being put on the spot in a high pressure moment in conversation, where it's different from, being on the field and going out there and just doing things. Now it's, well, this person that I'm speaking to, I don't want to let them down if they're going to be the coach that I'm playing for a few years. And it just becomes, again, there's a very layered approach to these things. I think Florida feels really good about the way that they've handled CJ Hester's recruitment. I think that maybe the way that he responded, and which would be positive, could be the reason that Florida has slowed down with Brody Jennings, having felt good about CJ Hester for a while, started gaining traction with CJ Bronaugh. So we're going to dial it back on Brody Jennings would be the way that I feel that this one shook out, or has shaken out so far. But again, July 1st is only a week away, but it's also a pretty long time away. And that's just how recruitment works, right? We got until a week from today before he announces, and July 2nd or the evening of July 1st, if CJ Hester's not in the class, I would expect Brody Jennings' recruitment to pick up again with the Florida Gators. The last player we're talking about is Davian Groce. Florida, Oklahoma, and Baylor battle, which is one that we've talked about as just so, I don't want to say random, so rare, right? And I love that. I understand when it's Florida, Georgia for a D line, Florida, Georgia, Texas for a D line, Florida, LSU for corners, all these, like, I get it. I understand it. It's coaches that are good at recruiting those spots, evaluating those spots, developing those spots. I get that. But I do love to see obscure battles where it's like, hey, Florida, Miami, and Nebraska. Florida, Ohio State. I love seeing recruitments like that. They're weird, but they're fun. And Florida, Oklahoma, Baylor is a battle. I don't know if we've ever seen that exact 3 combination. I think Florida has the leg up here, and I think Florida's had the leg up here kind of since his official visit, kind of since Davian Groce took his OV to Florida a couple weeks ago. I feel like Florida made a lot of moves there, and he doesn't have a commitment date set right now. But if Davian Groce wanted to commit to Florida, I think that they would take him. Like right now. I know there's people who talk about a ton of different receivers. I get it. I would also like some of those receivers we talk about, Samorian Wingo, Sedarian Morgan. Yeah, hell yeah. But I'm just saying that I don't think Florida would tell Davian Groce to wait if he wanted to commit. I think if he wanted to commit right now, they would take him. And so I think that he is a priority guy that they're looking at. He's someone that once he's ready to pop, if he wants to pop to Florida, they'll let him. And I think Davian Groce right now is leaning Florida. I just don't know what the commitment timeline looks like. He's been on campus once in Gainesville. Does he want to come back during the season? Does he want to pop right now? Like I'd be very interested to know what that timeline looks like. But right now, I think Florida's in the lead. Baylor's going to be tough to fend off in state. Oklahoma close enough to state. Florida's got the proximity disadvantage here, or also could be the advantage. When I went to college, I was like, hell yeah, I'm leaving. I want to go away. I want that freedom, that ability and experience to just be out on my own. Maybe that's it. If that is the case, then hey, Florida could be in the leg up there with Davian Groce, which I do think, by the way, they have the leg up. Not because of that, but I do think they have the leg up there. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free, wherever the podcast and on YouTube. We will be back tomorrow at the absolute latest to talk more Florida Gators. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.